Freemasonry is the largest, oldest, and the most powerful secret society that still exists in the world. Around 6 million members worldwide, and it's been around at the farthest back as we can verify, at least speculatively, as far back as the 10th century, right? Or if the Nobody knows when or why the Freemason as we know it today was established, but what we know by scholarship, somewhere at the very end of the early Middle Ages to the beginning of the High Middle Ages in Scotland, originated as stonemasons who created their own Catholic mysticism, esotericism, and occultism early on. And it was an early example of a trained labor union. Within the context, we got architects and stonemasons had to be separated from their fans and family for long periods of time to do their projects. Usually, the king will set them those projects in question in Scotland. So over time, they started to make their own community. Yeah, I say Catholic because this is before the Reformation, so Protestantism did not exist yet because you have to have a good understanding of mathematics in order to be a stonemason and an architect. So geometry played an important role in their unique methodology they were to develop at the time. Masons will say that it was founded by the first king of England, Attestan, or King Solomon, but there's no evidence for any of that. The only evidence we have as far back as we go is David the First of Scotland and Malcolm the Third of Scotland, who he is more well known in Shakespeare's work Macbeth, who has some connection in Freemasonry in 1051, when making the charter of the Lodge of St. John of Glasgow and building of Mother Kilwinning in 1140. With this, they easily debunked the conspiracy that the Knight Templars are a precursor to the Freemasons, while in reality they were two separate groups. In fact, there was a 21-year gap between the oldest Masonic temple, the Kilwinning, and the founding of the Templars, and a 78-year gap between the Halliwell manuscript, which is the oldest Masonic text, and the dissolution of the Templars. They're, Despite being two different groups, they may have interacted at one point, but that's speculation. Although scholars know almost nothing what the Freemasons were before the 1500s, the little that we do know, it was a group of illiterate stonemasons which for unknown reasons allowed non-stonemasons to join, which many people in high society to join and contribute their esoteric prelates, like Erwin von Sternberg, Gilbert de Clare, who he massacred Jews by the way, Alexander the Third of Scotland, Robert the Bruce, which 30,000 Masons joined him with his fight, William of Wickham, Ranulph Hitchkin, Harry Chichele, Charles Howard, who was the Lord High Admiral under Elizabeth I and James I, Paracelsus, Thomas Wolsey, Thomas Howard, who was a courtier of James I and Charles I. But during the Reformation, many Masons adopted Protestantism by all Masons, with the exception of the more traditional Scottish Masons. If it was labeled as a religion, it will be the 11th largest religion in the world. But if we're going to remove like more broad terms like traditional African religions or ethnic religions and stuff like that, it will be the sixth largest religion in the world. And if we want to remove the religious people off the list, it will be the fifth largest religion in the world. It is so powerful and influential that half of all powerful secret societies trace back to them, while many Masons want to forget that is because their involvement of imperialism, colonialism, the Atlantic slave trade, and friendly relations with the British, Spanish, Dutch, and French empires and their monarchs is the reason they got their global influence in the first place. For example, Mormonism has deep roots in Masonic. In fact, Joseph Smith was a Freemason, and before he died, his final words were a Masonic statement. The Scottish Bones copied Masonic ritual and secrecy, although they were not the Freemasons. It was more like a parody. Although they lose their power, the Yale University doesn't even bother to shut it down, believing it's a waste of time and resources. So Scottish Bone wasn't what it used to be. There's also the Order Temple Orientis, which mixed Freemasonry with the religion of Lima, founded by Aleister Crowley, who was a Mason. And the member of the Order Temple Orientis was L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology. Rosicrucianism was a movement that mixed Freemasonry with Protestant Christianity, with strong roots in esotericism, especially in the belief in alchemy. One of the founders was a 17th century Mason named Elias Ashmore, and many Rosicrucians were originally Masons. There was also the Oddfellows and the Shriners, who are the most well-known offshoots of Freemasonry. There was the Tool Society, founded by a Mason named Rudolf von Soppenwerf, who was the people, that same organization that gave Hitler his rise ideology to begin with. So there's that. There's also Bohemian Club, which is a parody of Freemasonry. There was Celso Ross, who made his own secret society, who was a Freemason himself, but he's made his own special crew to control Southern Africa. There was the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, founded by Masons. There's Martinism, which is a form of esoteric Christianity, founded by Masons. The original Ku Klux Klan, the first Grand Wizard, was a Mason, Nathan Bedford Forrest. The second Ku Klux Klan, the most powerful version that got mainstream success, was also founded by a Freemason named William Joseph Simmons. The Royal Institute of International Affairs is founded by Masons. Back then it was called the Round Table. And these are the same group that later made the Bilderberg Group, although not created but often affiliated, often overlap, the Trilateral Commission, and the Council of Foreign Relations, although they're pretty much useless. And the 1970s, they even said that they wanted as democracy, so there's that. There was the Hellfire Club, founded by an unknown Mason. There was the Carbonari, an offshoot of Freemasonry. There's the International Order of St. Hubertus, which is founded by a Mason named Franz Anton von Spark. There's the Freemasonic Order of the Golden Centurion, which was founded by the first generation of German industrialists, which believed in black magic. While the group had nothing to do with Freemasonry itself, many members were Masons. The United Order of the Golden Cross was organized by Freemasons. The Sons of Liberty was part of Freemasonry, and many important members were Freemasons. The Mystic Order of the Veiled Prophet and the Enchanted Rail is a Masonic branch. The Modern Woman of America is founded by a Freemason named Joseph Collier Root. The Theosophical Society was founded by Masons, Helena Blavatsky and Henry Olkoff. They sadly started the New Age, New Thought, New Religious movement and laid the foundation for esoteric fascism and esoteric Nazism. And many Masons started this pseudo-historical, pseudo-science theory of the Akashic records. Helena Henry, Charles Lindbergh, and Rudolf Steiner. All of them were Masons. The improved, benevolent, and protected order of Elks of the world modeled themselves on Freemasonry, where African Americans can join. There's also the Knights of Pythias, which was founded by a Mason named Justice H. Rathbone. There was the Ancient Order of the United Workmen, which was founded by a Mason named John Jordan Upchurch. There's also the Knights of the Golden Circle, where the most important members and leading members were Masons. Their goal was to create their own Roman Empire based on the ideas of the Confederacy, where the southern United States, Mexico, all of Central America, and all parts of the Caribbean, and small South American enclaves as their territory to become a slave empire. There was the Harvard branch of the Knights of Columbus, founded by Pedro Albizu Campos. Almost all these secret societies, with the exception of Mormonism, which is considered a legitimate religion as a secret society, were founded by Masons. The problem with this organization that is considered itself apolitical, while in practice not so much, where you're not supposed to talk about religion and politics among their ranks/lodges, which contradicts their Enlightenment roots, and sadly, its conservative nature becomes racist. In many cases, certain races were not allowed to join for long periods of times. Sexist, women for the longest time were not allowed to join, and religious intolerance, open atheists are not allowed to join. There they have to subscribe their God called the Great Architect of the Universe, which many are not tolerant to other religions. In many cases, Muslims, Jews, atheists, pagans, and Catholics. For example, Hindus were not allowed to join Freemasonry until the 1870s. Este, in many cases, if you were not baptized, you cannot become Mason. Sadly, this view actively promote right-wing philosophy or classical liberalism. Like, for example, Simon Bolivar, who founded the Masonic Lodge Number 2 of Peru, which he, like his Masonic companions, were dictators after liberating quote-unquote Latin America. 15 U.S. presidents were Freemasons: George Washington, James Monroe, Andrew Jackson, James K. Polk, James Buchanan, Andrew Johnson, James Garfield, William McKinley, Theodore Roosevelt, William Taft, and Warren Harding, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Harry Truman, Lyndon B. Johnson, and Gerald Ford. This list of presidents, many who are considered the worst presidents in U.S. history. For example, we have slave owners wanting to colonize Africa, the Panama Canal, the bombing of Puerto Rico in 1950, the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Teapot Dome scandal. Almost all of them were white supremacists, starting the Spanish-American War, which was based on lies, the Mexican-American War, and Watergate. 21 out of the 46 U.S. presidents had joined secret societies, which 15 of them are Freemasons, while the other 6, like Thomas Jefferson, Ulysses S. Grant, Rutherford Hayes, Richard Nixon, George W. Bush Jr. and Sr., joined different groups. Both Bushes are Skull and Bones members, but House and Grant joined the Oddfellows, which is an offshoot of Freemasonry, which technically there are 17 Masonic presidents. Freemason has a history of reactionary thought, like Albert Pike, an important figure in both Freemasonry and the U.S. Confederacy. Despite the group's modest origins, many illiterate craftsmen in the 12th century or earlier who founded Masonry, which anyone can join, but during the 18th century, only wealthy people can join, and despite today, anybody can join again, but the segregation of classes and the segregation of sexes keep the status quo of society. Many aristocrats of royal family joined the group who killed hatred of democracy, like H.R.H. Edward, Duke of Kent, England. There is inequality among the higher rank, which teach upward mobility. You have to have wealth, which already the wealthy can join and become high-ranking seniors, while the poor members have to wait. Usually, Freemasons are basically radical extremist centrists. If they were throughout history, both Nazi Germany and Bolshevik Russia persecuted them. Despite many Masons who were, during Franco's regime, were pro-Franco early on, and many generals of Francisco Franco were Masons, and many Masons were allies to Mussolini and helped organize the March of Rome. But has a history of joining fascists like the clandestine P. Lodge, a fascist Masonic group in Italy that had members who were cabinet ministers, newspaper publishers, the head of the television, radio stations, the head of Secretary of Service, armed forces, where there's anti-communist mentality, members like Calvi and Kelly, and the head of the Vatican Bank was to be used to finance extreme right-wing military regimes in Latin America, have joined forces with fascist terrorist groups like the Armed Revolutionary Cell, and some believe that the Marxist Red Brigade were controlled by the Italian government to discredit socialism, which the Italian Masons continued the legacy of Mussolini, which members like José López, Victor Manuel, Emiliano Massera, and Stefano delle Chiar. Other dictators who were Freemasons, like Winston Churchill, J. Edgar Hoover, Silvio Berlusconi, Benedicto Arnold, and many members of the British royal family. In fact, when the United Grand Lodge of England was founded, 20 years later, the first member of the British royal family joined. So they did it took that long. Este, While Freemason has its history of classical liberalism, helped create representational democracy in the United States and France, which somehow they think is a good thing, and only the fact that that type of democracy is an illusion. Like when the French National Assembly was formed, 24% of delegates to a state general were Masons. 5 out of 6 members on Napoleon's Grand Council of the Empire were Masons. 6 out of 9 imperial officers were Masons. 22 out of 30 marshals of French, France were Masons. 8 out of the 56 people who signed the Declaration of Independence were Masons. 20 out of 55 delegates to the U.S. Constitution were Masons. Although 6 of them didn't become Masons until after the Constitution. 10 signatures of the U.S. Declaration of Confederation were Masons. 31 out of the 63 generals in George Washington Continental Army were Masons. 4 presidents of the Continental Congress between 1774 to 1785, and 10 out of 30 governors of the 13 colonies during the Continental Congress are Masons. The Masons has historically promoted and or benefited from imperialism, colonialism, and the electric slave trade, especially during the British Empire and the genocide against the indigenous people of the Americas. That during the 19th century, many Masons, lodges, and Grand Lodges wanted to contribute American expansion. The Albert Pike's dream was a messianic goal for Manifest Destiny to create a republic Masonic brotherhood across all the Americas, both in North America and Latin America, under imperial power of the Scottish U.S. Southern Council, and view Latinos as semi-civilized. The example of a Masonic imperialism that set Cuban Masons to fight each other to create a Cuban-Mexican Masonic affair, something that was basically organized by Albert Pike. The Freemasons helped the nation building of the British Empire to create military lodges, and many warrant officers and upper-class military joined, where they led non-whites to join like Native Americans, but were treated as exotic curiosity instead of fellow brothers. In other groups like Chinese, Indians, Egyptians, etc., only aristocrats were allowed to join. Thus, no middle class as poor foreigners were not allowed. While many Masons today will say that Masons were abolitionists, but historically they were the minority. The standard was empire building. That includes slavery, the Atlantic slave trade, the Islamic slave trade, genocide against the indigenous people of the America. That was the default position by many Masons at the time. Masons being against that were actually the minority. First, in Italy, Benito Mussolini was in power and made government a national union with many Freemason members, led by the head of the National Fascist Party. While Freemasons were persecuted in Nazi Germany and Franco Spain, but in Italy, that is considered the birthplace of fascism, was the opposite. According to the UCLA Masons of California, few Masons were actually persecuted, sent to exile, or condemned to isolation or police exclusion, as it been called back then. Most members entered into lethargy. Many Freemasons held Mussolini's government from outstanding positions, such as Alberto Beneduce, the main planner of the Italian government, from outstanding positions of the economy, Palmino Giuliano, Minister of National Education, and Domondo Rossoni, a fascist and trade unionist, writer Curcio Malabarte, and many others like Terenzio Interlandi, who later headed the magazine Difesa della Razza. Was also a member. It was a confusing and contradicting time. Freemasons who were not openly against the government, the huge majority of members were not annoyed. Also, in the time, most well-informed magazines were published, and Julio Evola, Arturo Requin's former colleague, became well established. Many Masons led Native Americans to join, but it was not usually with good intentions. At best, it was to assimilate to white Anglo-Saxon Protestantism, mainly Episcopalian or Presbyterian culture, while keeping their identity. At worst, destroying their culture to civilize the savage. Up until the 20th century, the Masons allowed foreigners and indigenous to join as a tool to westernize them in their British, Dutch, French, and Spanish empire building. There were many active intercolonial nationalism in the Oceanic and Pacific. Adolphe Thiers, who was also a Mason, was the man that ordered the suppression and later massacre of the Paris Commune. Despite there was a debate among Freemasons about this anarchist revolution, the overwhelming majority viewed them as a threat, with only 10 to 1,000 people who were Freemasons joining the revolution. During the second KKK, Masons were allies with the second Ku Klux Klan. Both groups joined each other's secret society, to the point that the second Klan was acceptable, respected, and even legitimacy, where Harry Truman, who was a Mason himself, contemplated to join the Ku Klux Klan for better connections to become the U.S. president. That in the 1920s, the Ku Klux Klan have 11 elected governors, 75 representatives, and 16 senators. Another infamous Freemason is Chamal ad-Din al-Afghani, who was also a Freemason, started the idea, or at least popularized the idea, that Islam is attacked by the West, laid the groundwork for modern-day Islamic Jihad, which many early groups were formed inside various Masonic lodges in the Ottoman Empire. Early Masons, even some today, subscribe to Israelism, which is mainly racial supremacy, both white and black supremacy, where groups who were not associated with Jews considered themselves as one of the lost tribes of Israel. Started at the Reformation, that many Protestants identified themselves as Jews/Israelites, and during England, the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, that England is the New Jerusalem, and theologically justified the existence of the British Empire as preordained by God, and white people are the true Israelis, and the Jews as the forced ones of the synagogues of Satan, based on the book of Revelation. These white supremacist beliefs have become established lore and ritual in Freemasonry. Another example is the Dual Society, who founded the Nazi Party and gave Hitler its ideological beginning, which was founded by Mason, which is another thing. And the P2 Lodge of extremist fascist organization wanted to do a coup in Italy to establish a fascist government were also Freemason. Many Freemasons will say they were not legitimate, but the problem is they only lost their legitimacy after the fact when they were exposed. So most of their activities happened during at the time that was considered still legitimate. And the problem is, despite Nazi Germany and Franco Spain and Japan persecuted Freemason, almost every fascist dictator, especially before and after World War II, were Masons. Examples who are confirmed Freemasons, I repeat, who were confirmed members of regular lodges, were the Bolivian dictator Hugo Panzer Suarez, este, the other dictator were Charles de Gaulle, Tran Cho Kim, although disputed, Charles de Gaulle, Sultan Muhammad V of Morocco, Noroto Sihanouk of Cambodia, este, Blanco Winship of Puerto Rico, who committed the Ponce Massacre and the Rio Piedra Massacre, Fulgencio Batista of Cuba, Rafael Trujillo, Dominican Republic, Leon Cortes Castro from Costa Rica, Oscar Benavides from Peru, Gabriel Terra from Uruguay, este, Anastasio Somoza García of Nicaragua, Luis Somoza de Baile, Nicaragua, Anastasio Somoza de Baile, Nicaragua, Alfredo Stroessner, Paraguay, the longest reigning fascist dictator in all of Latin American history, and the fourth longest reigning fascist dictator in the whole world. The other three will be Antonio Salazar, Portugal, Francisco Franco, Spain, and Chen Shek from China. Carlos Castillo Armas from Guatemala, Humberto Castelo Branco from Brazil, Juan Valesco Alvarado from Peru, Gustavo Rojas Pinilla from Colombia, Augusto Pinochet from Chile, Guillermo Rodriguez Lara from Ecuador, and Omar Torrijos, Panama. All these people, these horrible tyrants of fascism, especially in Latin America, were all confirmed Freemasons. Many of them were dictators while they were still members, and no single respected Grand Lodge ousted him. Some became members before they became dictator, but not a single Grand Lodge condemned their actions once they took power. And some of these members, este, became joined Masonry after they ended their tyrannical rule, and nobody condemned them or stopped them from joining the membership. One famous example will be Jose P. Laure, the dictator of the Philippines, who was a fascist alive. All these examples I mentioned were fascist dictators and never condemned their actions. There was another Mason who committed a horrific crime called Antes Perai, who prayed for order before killing 77 people. Or a non-fascist example who was a Freemason. In Mexico, Plutarco Elias Calles, este, who did a war against Catholics or other tyrannical people like Ian Smith and Porfirio Diaz. Remember, Freemasonry, the only reason they got their global status and power because they participated in imperialism, colonialism, and the extermination of the indigenous people of the Americas. They are guilty of all those three things. They are guilty of the Atlantic slave trade, they are guilty of the genocide against the indigenous people of America, and they are guilty because they work with the fascist Italian government. Unlike in Germany or France or Spain, where they were actively persecuted, in Italy they were part of the government. And during Spain, they supported Franco early on before they got betrayed. And countries like during World War II, fascist countries during their dictatorship during World War II, Morocco, este, France, Vietnam, and Cambodia were controlled by fascists who were also Freemasons. And during the Cold War and before World War II, many fascist dictatorships that existed in Latin America were Freemasons themselves. Like I said, not a single respected Grand Lodge condemned their actions while they were in power or after they ended their reign. They decided to join, never condemned them. And also the infamous P2 Lodge, who started to establish an infamous terrorist organization. These are the worst things that have ever done, and they will never apologize for it. They will always play the game that they were not legitimate or they were not real Freemasons, playing the same apologetic that Christians and Muslims and Buddhists will do every time something bad happens that represents their religion.